Absolutely.
Good.
Right.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this cabinet. We don't have a full agenda in the sense of items, but we do have a full agenda in the sense of the topics that are under discussion. And so I'll move swiftly on. Do we have apologies, Nick? Catherine, maybe. Do we have any declarations of interest on any of these items? Okay, I'll turn immediately then to item 3, which is the 2022-23 Revenue and Capital Budget Outturn Statement. Over to you, Councillor Garrett. Rachel.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So, colleagues, as you're aware, last year was an unprecedented year, and we saw inflation at rates that the country hasn't seen since the 1970s, and that brought some painful cost pressures to our council. I'm presenting to you the Outturn report for that year. Our headline figure is a £3.5 million deficit at the end of year, which requires the use of reserves. You will recall that this was projected to sit at around £6 million at month 9, showing that we have in fact made significant progress against this. As I have shared over the past year, the drivers for deficits in last year's budget included inflation, pay awards, which were needed to ensure that our staff were able to maintain a standard of living and that we were able to retain staff. Significant additional costs on homelessness of circa £1.35 million. Overspends within adults and children's social care services of around £367,000 for adult social services and around £4.1 million for children's social services. Those were due to increased demand post-COVID and increased complexity of cases and high-cost placements, which have been a feature throughout that year. Our end-of-year reconciliation has brought several changes to the budget that we should consider. These include several unexpected grants from Welsh Government, which were allocated late in the year to the tune of around £1.3 million. Our services outperformed their in-year budget recovery to the tune of £1.7 million, and we had several changes in capitalisation to the tune of around £990,000 of financing from capital receipts. This means that our anticipated call for reserves dropped from the projected £6 million at month 9 to circa £3.5 million. Sorry, I do believe I just tried to use plural millions rather than million there. My apologies. I must note that on reserves, as in previous discussions on our reserve levels, that whilst the net expenditure of our council has increased year on year, the level of reserves held current and budgeted are ahead of the reserve levels going back to 2014-2015. We acknowledge that those reserves were bolstered in 2019 to 2020, but that was due to a result of a one-off significant VAT reclaim, and in 2020, 21 and 21-22 as a result of additional Welsh Government funding, which was benefiting all councils to meet the cost of the pandemic and its aftermath. So whilst we'd like to improve this outlook, we are indeed holding the baseline that our officers and indeed members of previous administrations will recognise as being highly familiar. This report asks that we rationalise reserves in the following way: that we release £576,000 from the Rural Development Plan Reserve, and the Homelessness Prevention Reserve is transferred to the Council Fund to increase overall resilience to 5.85% of our net revenue budget during this period of economic disturbance. And this period of economic turbulence, increasing cost pressures and below inflation funding settlements. We also ask that the remaining COVID reserves balance of £1.316 million is released and instead earmarked for future pay inflation pressures. We also ask that any further rationalisation is deferred to the medium-term financial strategy, which is under development and will lend the financial framework and alignment so the council's community and corporate plan. So we now have a piece of work which is being undertaken as part of the upcoming medium-term financial strategy to develop our medium-term reserve strategies and stabilise the level of our reserves, and to also consider the levels held in light of increasing council budgets, the demands upon our services, and our budgetary risks. This will include ensuring that prudent use is being made of our reserve investment, and where possible, that it isn't used to underwrite budget deficits, and to ensure that effective outcomes are identified from any investment that looks to capture the benefits to shape future service delivery. We also need to consider other implications of this report. You will recall that the initial forecasts expected 10 schools to go into deficit at end of year. This has not happened. Our team in the finance department has worked with our schools, and this number has reduced to 5. I believe this is below a level that was seen pre-pandemic, when there was no cost of living crisis or runaway inflation. We have in fact seen a reduction in school balances during the year of 2.698 million, as outlined, which was significantly lower than the 4.653 million that had been previously forecast. I will, however, caution that we do have risks, and they are very real going forward into this year. The economic climate has not calmed as we had anticipated, and I would point to the specific risks of adults and children's services and state that we require respective chief officers and the responsible financial officer to continue to closely manage and monitor the operational and financial performance of that area, to ensure that all possible remedial action is taken to constrain our costs, and that this is reported to us, to the relevant cabinet portfolio holder regularly. Sorry, I am losing all the moisture in my mouth already. So we're also asked in this report to note the capital expenditure for the year of 43.693 million, with 33 million of budget requested to be slipped to 23 to 24. This is as a result of net underspends across various smaller schemes within the programme. I have discussed this with our financial officers, and we are reviewing the forecasting in this area for the next future year. I also would point out that 2022 was a particularly exceptional year in terms of projects, which saw shortages of materials and huge cost inflations over that time. We also have 220 of capital receipts, which can be released back to the reserve to support future investment. We're also asked in this report to approve the capital slippage requests of 33 million, and acknowledging those challenging operating conditions. So I would then finally ask that we approve the capital budget revisions outlined in Appendix 6, which we're required to do to finalise our grant funding awards for the financial year, and that is the whistle-stop tour of the budget outturn. So back to you, Leader. Possible?
Thank you very much, Councillor Gareth. Sobering, but at the same time more encouraging than we expected. It's not fair winds ahead though. Before I bring in our scrutiny chair and questions from Councillor John, is there any observations from council members? Councillor Griffiths.
Thanks very much, and thanks Rachel, Councillor Garrick. This picture of the evolving budget for last year was debated many times during the year with the interim reports that we received. The final outturn shows that the pressures were managed, and the contributions from reserves of 3.5 million was probably less than some of us expected at various times in the year. So various overspends were balanced to a significant extent by managed underspends in other areas. But I still want to draw attention to the fact that the most significant area of overspend, 4.2 million, was that of social care. And I think we need to recognise that and consider whether our ability to manage that expenditure will be different in the future. We've had debates in council on this. I do want to refer back to them. There was a sort of different presentational situation between one that I gave in council to one given by Councillor Paul Pavia. So Councillor Pavia reminded council, and I actually think correctly, that a very significant part of social care provision is done by relatively small scale independent providers. This is particularly true in adult services, who are operating in their own very difficult market and operating with rising costs and their own fragilities. We didn't have the chance to exchange views in council, but I just want to put it on the record that I recognise that picture that he paints, and I recognise the fact that he works in a professional context where he's aware of those providers. But the alternative picture that I presented was relating to the provision of highly complex care for children. And this is the sector that appears to be driving the cost overrun, where there has been a very significant concentration of provision into a small number of very large firms who are controlling that market, and may well be making excess profits out of that market. The two pictures, that of Councillor Clavius and myself, can at the same time be true for the two sectors of social care provision. And if the picture that I present for highly complex children's services is correct, I come back to the point that I have made previously, that there is a responsibility of us as commissioners of services, the local authority, but also, I believe, our local authority, Monmouthshire County Council, working in a regional context and working with Welsh Government, not to just be a passive player in this market, passive recipient of the way in which the market is shaping, but instead to be an active shaper of that market. And that means working regionally, working nationally, to actually find new and alternative forms of provision. Only if we can do that does it seem to me that we are in a position where we can contest some of the concentrated provision in that market and ensure that there are alternative, good quality and more affordable provision. So I rehearse all that because I think it needs to be put on the record once again. But my question to us as a cabinet and to Rachel, is there any evidence that that reshaping of the market regionally and nationally is being initiated?
Councillor Chandler, would you like to come in?
Yes.
Portfolio?
Nationally, I don't think I'm in a position to really say how that reshaping is progressing, other than obviously within children's services, the Eliminate agenda to try and eliminate profit from children's care. What I can talk about is locally, and yeah, as you said, the overspend or the that we had in the last financial year that we're considering was considerable in social care, and particularly in children's social care. The steps that we've taken, though, I think have started to pay dividends in terms of the results we're achieving. So an early projections for the current financial year suggests that actually children's social care is actually not far from the budget that we wanted to achieve. And what we've been able to do, and looking at some of the areas of trying to reduce our costs. So, for example, again, sticking with children's social care for the moment, we're increasing our emphasis on both trying to retain and recruit more in-house foster carers, so we're not having to use independent fostering agencies, which cost more and which make large amounts of profits for the companies at the expense of children in vulnerable situations. So, for example, just earlier this week, myself and the chair of the council, Councillor Howells, was at a thank you event for foster carers that we held at Caldicott Castle to bring together all the foster carers, the in-house foster carers, and some of their wards, and to celebrate them, hear their stories, make sure they felt appreciated, and through that use that as a vehicle for also hoping to recruit more foster carers. So that's just one example of the things that we've been doing. I'm sure our chief officer can say a little more about that. We are looking at trying to reduce the reliance on private providers who are providing some of the intensive supervision for children in high-risk family settings. We're trying to manage some of the more complex cases to reduce the costs, and we've gone through certain measures because those are the ones that drive us. But at the end of the day, when it comes to particularly children's social care and safeguarding, we have the statutory obligation. We can't control the cases that come in through our front door, and if there are cases that come in that we have to respond to, we have that responsibility as a council, as corporate parents, to step in and to do that. So there are limits to our ability to do that, but I think we're managing that side of things fairly well. I think with the adult social care, again, we're very much at the challenge that we face is increasing demand. So although we're trying to manage how we respond to the demand of people that require support in adult social services, and we're doing a lot to try and manage the care placements, the care packages that people have to try and minimise the costs, trying to recruit more micro carers who can be paid through direct payments to reduce the cost both of the care packages, but also the environmental cost of carers having to drive around large parts of the county. We're doing a lot of that, but again, we're seeing just an increased demand of people coming through, and some of the preventative work that we're doing, which we are still confident is going to pay dividends in terms of reducing some of the demand on our care packages by preventing some of the people getting into a more dependent state. That is a thing that is going to take some time to go through, and we're not yet in a position to really quantify the savings that we're able to make through that agenda. So that probably is the area at the moment that actually I'm more concerned about in terms of how we're controlling costs and how we're working with health services in that integrated work to try and free up hospital beds, but at the same time not put an unsustainable burden on our own budgets. Do you want to add anything for that, Jane?
I think you answered it perfectly. Prevention is always going to be our key strategy. Developing our in-house provision, reducing the use of IFAs, and developing our residential portfolio is our way forward, both at a local, regional level.
I think too, I should remind us all that when we looked at the budget on several occasions, we made the statement, and I'll make it again, that we are going to keep very close oversight and control over all budget lines, but particularly over adult and children's social care, and over adult additional learning needs and housing. And we come on to one of our responses later on the agenda. I think in terms of the national debate, which we know is a very lively one and is ongoing, it's one that we will take up with the Deputy Minister when she comes to Monmouthshire next week. Yet another aspect of relationship building. So can I bring in Councillor Neil? For the record, here is the chair of the Performance and Oversight Committee, and looked at this report and may have some observations to make.
Thank you, Leah, and good evening, Cabinet. I'll I'll confine my comments to the notes that I made during the meeting and comments that arose, if I may. And apologies if any of that is focusing on one or two of the issues that have already been discussed. It's hard not to, because they're very prominent. You've already highlighted the issue in adult social care overspend of £367,000 and of children's of 4.147 million. One of the issues that arose was to keep an eye on what might be happening in England, as well as what good practice there is in Wales. We're so close to neighbours in England, and the development in England of primary care networks and integrated care partnerships, which are becoming very much the system, the development of an integrated care system, because our neighbours.
For a point of information, could I just say, I know Bevan Health Board is in fact looking at both those issues and developing them as we speak. So in one sense, we have looked over the border, and we are part of those discussions through the regional board.
Great. So that was one issue that was seen to be constructive in terms of there may be good practice beyond Wales, and of course there's good practice in Wales too. In children's, the 1.47 million overspend, there were questions about whether or not the amount of overspend indicated an understatement in the actual forecast of underlying true expenditure, whereas adult social care should be a more predictable outcome based on predictable numbers of older people who fall into care. Children's, we recognise, is a more volatile one, but there may be an issue there of understating the forecast. And whether or not that's an embedded issue, I leave to the cabinet members responsible, but it's certainly a potential issue for consideration. Homelessness, of course, was another significant area of overspend at 1.35 million. And there was an interesting comment in the report at 2.2 that the council cannot claim its full housing benefits subsidy, which was something that we unpacked in the meeting itself. You've touched on pay awards and the necessity of overspend on pay awards. However, we were pleased to see that when you put all of that together, the situation had improved from the end of the third quarter, and we made very clear in our comments that that was certainly an improvement which we greatly welcomed. And I know a lot of hard work has gone into that, and that's much to be praised. However, at 2.3 in the report, with that overall improvement, which is 2.557 million less than from month 9, there is a breakdown of what is significantly non-recurring one-offs. So there is 990,000 from capital receipts. There is 1.3 million additional grant funding, which was certainly not something that could have been banked on earlier for adult social care. And then 1.73 million from service reductions. And we discussed and we were concerned that those may be non-recurring one-offs. So where do you go this year if those are underlying issues that you're going to have to contend with this year, because the underlying onward expenditure may still be at the higher level and may not be capable of being offset this year. At 2.4 in the report, the report highlights financial risks represented in the report by the current volatile operating environment in adult social care and in children's social care. So that would be a very big concern for any local authority, that the senior team in the finance department are highlighting volatile operating environment in the two areas of extremely high expenditure. So clearly your comments, Leader, earlier of monitoring, closely monitoring, become extremely important, so that we don't get behind the situation, but rather get ahead of it. The capital receipts are noted of 3.27 million, moved into the funding of revenue expenditure, which is, of course, an allowable matter, but it's again something which we were expressing concern is not something that can recur. And we also, at 2.8 in the report, we highlighted the slippage, as it's termed, in capital expenditure of a very large amount of £33 million into the year 23-24. So of the total budget, that's 42% of the whole year's budget, to have slipped from last year into this year. There were some important questions that were raised about why that would be the case, and some useful discussion that that touched on that. However, in the report itself, there is an identification at 2.8 that this may be caused by lack of planning, of project planning, unrealistic profiling of the project, for the projects to be actually conducted. So I draw that to your attention. That was again something that was raised. Reserves were again a matter reported in item section 4 of the report, where they are scheduled to shrink over 5 years by 1/3, from 33.5 million to 22.7. So for any organization, any local authority, that's a very, very significant shift in reserves. And we raised questions about the impacts on our resilience. We're actively now projecting that to be the end of 5 years. What will that mean for the council's capability to be resilient? And I refer back to the previous report that we considered, that we linked to this, Leader, which was the public protection report, where there were already comments in the public protection report in section, if I can find it, in section 5, there were reports of their inability to be able to struggle to take on new statutory work in the funding. And again, the linkage with the ongoing impact on service expenditure, if public protection is identifying its struggle to take on new statutory work, is something which I think needs to be certainly focused on. And just moving to the end of the report, 5.2 and 5.3, it's quite unusual to see in a year-end report lines that are highlighted by the senior finance team in bold, but then 5.2 and 5.3, indeed they are. And the bold highlights are clearly a warning. They're a warning that the future use of reserves must be wise and prudent. And that is something which I think, in any finance team for any organization, to be highlighting something in that way is a really important matter. And the link that is being made in the bold highlights is that future use of reserves should not be used for covering off service overspends. So there's clearly a concern within the team that they felt it necessary to highlight this. And just a couple of notes to finish, if I may, Leader. The children's services that referred to, we had some further discussion about the numbers of children within the service and who are being supported, those in care. And it was noted and of interest that 5 years ago, when that question was put to Jonathan Davis, he was able to clarify that there were 60 to 70 fewer children in the system, the care system, around 5 years ago than there are now. However, since 2021, the end of 2021 and the end of the core period of COVID, the numbers have slightly reduced. So somewhat reduced numbers driving an overspend of £4.147 million indicates that there are a number of things clearly happening. One of them, it would appear to be greater complexity in some of the cases, but that also raised the question, why would that be? Why would there be greater complexity? What is driving that? And again, I highlight that for the attention of the Cabinet. And finally, the ongoing situation in terms of the economic outlook for this year. Interest rates are clearly a concern, and we're a concern to the committee, but also the impact on local businesses, who, of course, are going to need the support all the support they can get in these challenging economic times. And I finish my comments with that, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Neil. It's appreciated, and indeed we want to have this feedback from scrutiny, which, as you'll know, have been incorporated in the report as it comes towards Cabinet. Quite rightly, you raised some very challenging issues, which sadly, I think, is faced across the whole of the United Kingdom. I attended the WLGA AGM along with Deputy Leader Paul Griffiths, and one of the discussions around coffee was about the complexity of cases both in adult and children's care, and how we very much need to seek regional and national approaches, an issue that Councillor Chandler spoke to. And I'd come back to the fact that we must be absolutely focused on clear oversight of all the budget lines. We inherited a difficult situation around reserves. We were met with an extremely volatile economic and social, I would say, conditions, which are not abating as yet. And we, along with every other council, have to remain absolutely responsible with what we do with public money, and that includes strengthening our oversight. And I think this report, and thank you very much, Councillor Garrett, for the oversight and scrutiny you have given from Cabinet, has made it very clear that's what we must do. And at that point, I'd like to bring in Councillor John. You've got 3 questions you'd like to ask.
I have. Thank you, Leader. Good afternoon, everyone. My first question is about the asset Newport Leisure Park, and one of the challenges for the council since the purchase of the leisure park has been explaining to the public and others why that purchase was made. That it was a long-term investment to improve the council's finances. But it has been a challenge to ensure that people adequately understand that. And I was listening very carefully to the contributions in the Performance and Overview Committee last week, and I noted the comments from one Labour member basically calling for the asset to be basically given away for £1, which says to me that there are councillors who don't understand why these long-term investments have been made. So have you had that discussion with your group so that councillors are clear as to why that investment was made and why we should keep that asset, because it continues to add value to the council's finances?
Sorry, that wasn't the question I received.
No, it wasn't.
Sorry, I haven't got the exact
I've got it in front of me.
The question in front of me, but it was about the contribution of one of your Labour members in Performance and Overview, who said basically we should flog it for £1. Can you rule that out?
Yeah, I mean, I
What
can.
your question was, can the cabinet member rule out acting on calls from within the Labour group to give away Newport Leisure Park for £1? I'm always impressed by your ability to listen and scrutinise what goes on in other committees. Councillor John, I'd like to take a leaf out of your book. Have you got something you'd like to
I should
say?
get Netflix.
So I think we're very clear that that was a tongue-in-cheek comment that was inspired by concerns over the performance of that particular asset, which hasn't quite met that 2% target that was set for it. And in short, no, we're not going to sell it for £1 or £2. You'll be glad to know.
50p.
No, not for
Okay.
no.
Okay, thank you. It didn't seem like a tongue-in-cheek question, but okay.
Take that very seriously.
Next, I wanted to ask about parking enforcement, and I noticed the significant shortfall in income from parking enforcement, despite the fact that it continues to be a significant issue for residents. The fact that a minority do continue to park illegally, causing massive disruption. So, how would the cabinet member explain that shortfall, given the continuing issue that residents are facing?
Okay, so for background, so we're aware in 2019 that enforcement was decriminalised, so the responsibility for enforcement was passed from the police to local authorities. That came without funding. Several Gwent local authorities then engaged a consultant to predict income, which will be derived from issuing fixed penalty notices. And essentially since 2019, and obviously we came in last year inheriting that budget in 2022, that income target, which was £325,600, has never been met. It's recognised as being unachievable. The actual 22 to 23 budget, which we inherited, had an under recovery income of £176,000 predicted. Unfortunately, that was still incorporated into the budget. It also recognised in that budget mandate that there were service running costs that had increased by about £49,000, which led to recurring pressures of essentially between that and the under recovery of £225,000. That's £250,000 that estimate was off by. So those increased running costs come from previously unbudgeted revenue costs, which include the need for an IT system and equipment, and a shortfall in incomes also arisen from sickness absence and vacant posts due to staff turnover. And we've talked a lot about how hot the jobs market has been over the last year and how challenging that is, and also responding to genuine local priorities that our residents see, particularly things such as school drop-offs and parking issues there, and travel time. We've also got an issue with the travel time due to the large geographical area of our county. So that means we've got downtime. We have to respond to issues with pay and display machines, for instance. So going forward in our budget, our mandate responds to those challenges for 23 to 24, and we've reset that budget using increased car parking charges. And the team itself will be reviewing service delivery, which will include proposals to introduce traffic orders for all bus stops and school zigzag areas to enable us to get land fines to be issued, to give fines, which goes above the simple education that was being relied on previously. We'll also be considering whether or not civil enforcement officers would be self-funded, and we'll be looking to learn from approaches from other authorities, for example, pros and cons, potentially looking at camera enforcement cars. So I think what we need to recognise underlying all of this is ensuring our highways are safe for everyone rather than issuing notices and securing income. And the strategy previously was very much about securing income. You know, in a perfect world, like you said, most people do, but in a perfect world, everybody would be parking legally and responsibility and buying their car parking tickets, which would mean that we wouldn't need to issue tickets. that concept doesn't sit readily along the traditional cost recovery models of thinking. But we have to balance what we're looking at here, and our intention is to provide a safe county where there is legal parking.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is about the level of reserves, which you've mentioned already, but how concerned are you about the current level of reserves? Obviously, we've seen a significant reduction now this year. And what plans does the administration have to increase those reserves going forward, please?
Okay, so I think just for this, I think let's talk about some context. So if we look at the screen, we can see here that we're in 2023 to 2024 down here, and we'll see that we have essentially total reserves of 19,000. Sorry, council funds at 11.1 million, sorry, that was 19 million, and earmarked reserves at 7.9 million. Now, if we go back and I discussed this in the presentation, that when we came to 2020 to 2021, there was a significant one-off VAT call, which raised reserves. And then Welsh Government significantly provided funds to councils during the pandemic, which again bolstered the reserves. But if we actually go back and look at mid-austerity years, what we'll find is that actually 2018 and 2019, those reserves that we were holding were significantly lower to the reserves we're holding at the moment. We are sitting roughly around where the administration has been comfortable and has been comfortable previously with lower levels of reserves. So I think it's just clear to understand that concept and background. So, and again, as I stated in my presentation of the paper, we are now looking with the medium-term financial strategy to develop our reserve strategy in the medium term and stabilise those reserves. Obviously, we'll be considering the levels held in light of our increasing council budgets, our demand upon services and our budgetary risks. And that will include ensuring that we use our reserves and investment prudently, and wherever possible that we don't use it to underwrite budget deficits. We're looking to ensure effective outcomes identified for any investment that looks to capture the our benefits to shape the future of our service delivery. So essentially, we are roughly equivalent, if not slightly higher than we have been under previous administrations, and we are looking to develop a sensible midterm plan that does look to bolster those reserves above the depths that they went to under back in 2019.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think with that, we'll move on to the recommendations. As you can see, there's 10, and Councillor Neil very correctly drew our attention to many of them. I don't intend to read them out.
I think I did cover most of them in my presentation, Luda.
You did indeed, Councillor. Do we accept these recommendations, Cabinet?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
We do.
Thank you. So let's move on to item 4. And thank you for your attendance, Councillor Neil.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too,
And
Minister.
welcome, Mayor of Monmouth, Councillor Tom Curtin. Very pleased you could join us, because this is a good news story in many ways, and we welcome and would welcome your comments at some point. So item 4 is to reopen Monmouth Cemetery for new burials, and yet again, Councillor Garrett, we're calling on you.
I think I've run out of water.
We can find you some more, I'm sure.
Oh, thanks. So yeah, you've stolen my thunder a bit there, Lida. So yeah, welcome, Councillor
Good evening.
Curtin. It's absolutely lovely to have you here, and as Mayor of Monmouth. And again, it's because we'd like to thank Monmouth Town Council, its collaboration with ourselves at the County Council and its proactive stance on this. I think it's great that we are collaborating and cooperating with town councils within the county, and I think it's a model that's excellent, and I would like to extend my thanks to yourself at the town council and the working group on cemetery. So just for everybody else, previously the council had to close the cemetery in 2012 in Monmouth. So close to new burials, obviously it was open to visits, etc. Sorry. The closure to new burials was due to an environmental report which indicated that the water table was adverse to new burials at the depth of 6 foot. So the water itself in the area for new graves was basically at or above the depth of new graves. At the time, the installation of a drainage system was considered, but unfortunately found to be uneconomic in comparison to the limited number of plots that it would provide. The cemetery has been able to reopen existing graves for second and third coffins, and also for ashes caskets, and also reserve spaces have been honoured since then. And the offer for new cremated remains, plots remain, but the burial of caskets has not been able to be offered. So, as we mentioned or alluded to, Monmouthshire Town Council very much would like to understandably reopen the cemetery, and they proactively approached our council to facilitate this. Naturally, we've been working with the Town Council to achieve this, and I think Rian Jackson, our cemeteries officer, is on the call as well, and I'd like to extend thanks to Rian and also to Nick Keys from Estates for the work that's been done to help facilitate this as well, and for the production of this report. So, in order to facilitate the reopening, existing paths within the cemetery have been widened, and a turning circle has been provided for hearses and machinery. This then gives access to additional land within the cemetery perimeter, which is not as affected by the water table. And I'd like to point out that the Town Council has very generously funded this work. So as a result of that new access to additional land, we're now able to jointly offer graves in 3 areas. 2 areas, those can be at double depth, and 1 area at single depth. So double depth allows additional caskets to be buried. This combines to provide around 110 additional grave spaces, which we estimate to be between about 3.5 years to 7 years worth of new graves for Monmouth as a town. There is additional potential to create further grave spaces within the cemetery going forwards. And in addition to acknowledging the work of the Town Council, I'd also like to acknowledge the Friends of Monmouth Cemetery Group, who would like to take a lead in a planting project, who, in conjunction with the Monmouthshire County Council Biodiversity and Ecology team, will be looking to put in place that planting project and mitigate the effect of any loss of biodiversity as a result of opening up this additional area. So that is essentially it. I have extended my thanks to both the Town Council and our officers for working together to bring the cemetery to a point where it can come back into use. So thank you. I'd also like to thank the Town Council, who have provided further funding for the enabling works, which I've already discussed, and also agreed to pay additional costs to maintain new graves for the first 12 months. And this project's an excellent example of how we work together in partnership with our town councils to provide services for our communities. And that is essentially the proposed paper. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gareth. I think you're right. This is an excellent example, and it's not going to be the only one, because as we've said in our community and corporate plan, this is a key principle of ours, to work with communities and other partners. And it's really great to see that Friends of Monmouth Cemetery have been so actively involved, because this is so important to people, that they can mark and have a place where they can go and reflect on the death of a loved one. Before I open it up to Cabinet briefly, Councillor Curtin, is there anything you'd like to add? I'd like to add my thanks to Councillor Garrick for all the work that you and Monmouth Town Council have done, not only in supporting us through the resources, but actually being so proactive, and also being the conduit to the Friends of Monmouth Cemetery, because I'm sure it's a good relationships you had with them, which facilitated that their involvement.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chair. You know, I can only say that I think it was some very good work done by the former Monmouth Town Council. I know there was a couple of councillors that led on that, and we have picked it up and kind of carried on with it. And I think it was an important thing for us, because I was surprised myself to find out that people that potentially have lived for, you know, their families have been generational living in Monmouth couldn't be buried in Monmouth, which was quite shocking to me. And so due to the working group, we've done some fantastic work. And obviously, I'd love to thank Rhiann Jackson as well for liaising with the working group, doing all she has done. I'm glad we've got to a stage where between the Town Council and the County Council, we've kind of nudged something along that could have maybe just been kicked into the long grass, no pun intended. But I think this just goes to show, you know, I think I'll steal a line from the Welsh football team, you know, stronger together. You know, it's that classic thing, you know, as a team, we can get way more done. So I look forward to many more of these occasions and chances to do that with the County Council. So thank you all.
Indeed, as you know, when Paul Matthews, the executive, and myself came to visit you, we more or less made a pledge that's how it would be. And I'm glad this is a way to kickstart it in such a positive way, but also build on a legacy. Because democracy is about turnover of councils, but continuing to benefit the citizens we serve. It's a fairly straightforward open and shut case. It's a terrible pun, but it is. I didn't mean that to come out that way. So I suspect we don't need much discussion unless people want to. In which case, I think we approve, and are totally delighted by this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's very good news.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I'll stick around for the next one, because the next one's quite interesting, and I think a really good one as well, in regards to allowing that equality, you know, so kind of ceasing that option to reserve grave plots is a really good one. And yeah, so I'll stay around for a little bit if that's okay.
As long as you like, you're always welcome. So item 5, yet again, Councillor Garrick.
Excuse me, I just gargle before I start.
The reservation of grave plots, which, as Councillor Curtin pointed out, is connected to the policy that we want to pursue through our community and corporate plan.
So yeah, thank you very much. And again, thank you very much, Rhiann, for the support and the production of this report and the support in the formation of this policy. So this is about the cessation of the offer to reserve grave spaces. So many of our councils in Wales are facing issues at this stage with limited grave spaces, and Monmouthshire is no exception to this. Many councils, including some of our neighbouring authorities, no longer offer the ability to reserve grave spaces as a result of those limited spaces. And when you look at the reservation of grave spaces, what you find is those spaces can in fact remain unused for decades after reservation. So we've just discussed the reopening of Monmouth Cemetery with additional spots. So we can also move on for a case study in Llanfoist, which is included in the paper that you have before you. At Llanfoist, we're limited to 300 remaining plots. When we consider the annual usage, we can see that on an annual usage, if you have no reservations, what we're seeing is about an estimated 10 years worth of burial space left. Reservation rates reduce this, and our estimation that this would reduce it by 2.5 years. There's also the concern that as we knowingly approach capacity at our cemeteries, reservations may well increase. And again, it's that equity piece linked to our corporate and community plan where actually those reservations would go to individuals who are in the fortunate position of being able to make a reservation. Those reservations, if they increase because people are reserving as we reach capacity, will therefore cause us to reach capacity even earlier. So there's a small amount of time of income generated by these reservations. However, it is minimal. For instance, in Llanfairpwll Voice, the income is roughly equivalent to 2 new double-depth graves being purchased. That income doesn't justify the pressure that would be experienced for reservations as we reach capacity. Indeed, so in dealing with that capacity, we have to consider that we need time to identify new areas that can be used for grave plots. So in conjunction with the cessation of the reservation of grave spaces, the paper will also kick off a county-wide assessment of remaining burial space and an assessment of potential additional burial spaces throughout the county. That would look at both land owned by Monmouthshire County Council and third parties. So that cessation of the reservation policy will in fact, which is in line with other council, will give us that additional time to identify and implement additional spaces, which means we should be able to provide a continuous service to our residents. So therefore, I would ask that you approve the paper to neutral policy of on-demand burial plots. I would, of course, like to make sure that we're very clear that this applies to future reservations and that all existing reservations will, of course, be honoured.
Thank you. I think that is important to put on the record. Are there any comments? I think this is straightforward. This one. There are 2 recommendations to improve the proposed policy change in council managed cemeteries, which, as Councillor Garrett pointed out, is a progressive and very positive one. Do we approve?
Yes.
The second one is to commence a review of remaining burial space in Monmouthshire to inform a strategic assessment of future cemetery provision, inclusive of additional or alternative sites. And again, I think that was made very clear in your report. Do we agree?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the final item on the agenda, and you can sit back and relax.
Totally go. Matt Phillips is just going to speak because there's an exemption on this item. He's just going to give us some advice.
Come in, Matt. Matt?
We've just lost him, haven't we? He's done the mute leave button confusion thing, hasn't he?
Richard's wiped him out.
He nudged him off.
I'm always happy to offer you some advice if you want.
We've still got him for a while longer.
He's coming back, isn't he?
You're back.
It's that military background, it's probably put down.
My apologies, leader, cabinet councillors. That's me hitting the mute button, which was cleverly disguised as the leave button. So I'm sorry about that. So good afternoon, Matt Phillips, Chief Officer People and Governance and the Monitoring Officer. So the next item has a Schedule 12A Local Government Act 72 exemption on it. Now, the report that's on the agenda is in the public sphere, but there is an appendix to that which is exempt. And I just wanted to explain why it's exempt. It's because it contains not just commercial details, but actually details that would lead potentially to the identification of an individual or individuals, because we're talking about property acquisitions. So as a result, what we're going to need to do is stop the live stream, and if there were press or public in attendance at this point, we would need them to leave. So I just wanted to explain that while the report is available for people to access, the nature of the discussion will naturally need to take you into some of those details, which is why that's going to need to happen. So with your permission, leader, that's what I would ask you to do now.
Yes, permission given, absolutely.
Okay, I'll just stop the stream.
Bypass it.
I will leave as well. Have a good evening.
Best hat. Thanks, Dom.